World of Warcraft Midnight has completed its first 4 months, and now there was a big interview with Ion Hazzikostas. The whole thing was conducted by the YouTuber Bear, who was allowed to ask him some questions, and we're going to take a look at it. Among other things, it's about the acceptance of Midnight, meaning how it's received by the players, also the question of what the patches are like, are they too buggy, how do people like Sporefall, and so on and so forth. We'll take a look at all of that in this video. If you want to support me, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. The first part of this video was, how is Midnight received by the players? And the first thing he says is that it was mainly about the season. Was the feedback they received great? And they are very satisfied with it. They wanted to make Mythic Plus more accessible with Midnight, and they achieved that. They are also pleased with the new settings. One mounts and titles. In the raids, he says they experimented with split raids and other things. Delves would continue to rock. It would be a great PvP season, so he is completely satisfied with Midnight and says they have really good feedback, or have received very good feedback. On the topic of Delves, he also says they now have a dedicated team developing the Delves, and they actually want to bring more solo updates and door content in the future. That's why, for example, they released the bounty hunts. On the topic of housing, they also say that they've received good feedback from players, especially that no one is forced to do anything. And all in all, they want to continue with it. They also want to avoid connecting any systems like player power, meaning gear, to it, so that players don't feel pressured. Ansonsten, otherwise, they say that everything feels like it's based on a certain formula, so everything follows the same concept. They say yes, they can understand that, or rather, they see the whole thing. Another topic in this case is the raid ecosystem, for example, that it hasn't been touched or changed for a long time. Accordingly, they want to freshen things up a bit. Other than that, we talked a bit about prioritization in the team, yes. In the end, it was mainly about them trying to give that part of the game the most attention that currently feels the weakest. And I think you can understand that to some extent. He also says that in the end, they're a game where he believes there's no other like it. He says it's different because the player base is fundamentally different and includes so many players. They look at data, take feedback from the players to be able to prioritize better. And he knows it can be frustrating when the community gives feedback and they focus on something else at first, but he says they're doing what they can, they're giving it their all. On the topic of add-ons, or what I'll just call the add-on purge, he's also very satisfied with that. He says the whole thing isn't perfect yet and there's still work to do, but basically he's happy with the direction they've taken there, especially with 12.1. There will be a few improvements they want to implement. Otherwise, he says there are fewer and fewer bosses with workarounds through add-ons, so players can actually experience these bosses themselves. That's a pretty good thing. He also says in this context that the top 3 to 5 guilds in the world are on a completely different level, and that's why, yes, they have to make some bosses harder, because in the end, if a boss were made just for guilds in general, the race to world first guilds would be done with everything in 10 minutes. Something like at this point. And yes, basically he says here how everything has developed, and they're also very satisfied with the raid and the add-ons. The topic of buggy content, I find that very interesting, because he says that if something feels rushed or half-baked, they actually don't want to bring it into the game at all. And he says they decided on these faster patch cycles, and he's very proud of what his team is accomplishing. At the same time, he says they wouldn't include things in patches if they weren't actually ready, and instead that would be moved back 8 weeks to another patch. These 8 weeks per patch are a goal, but it's not set in stone, so it can still be pushed back a bit further. And in the end, he says he understands the frustration of the player from patch 12.0.5, but he doesn't think the whole thing was pushed out too quickly. Instead, there were a few simple errors in the system, in the processes, which he says would have happened either way. Yeah. What should I say? I'll stay out of it. Decide for yourself, or share your thoughts in the comments. There was also the topic of Sporefall. So with the flexible Mythic raid lockout, they're very, very happy with it. They've also received a lot of feedback. It's part of the classic Mythic raid lockouts. And accordingly, he thinks it's cool that now more people are able to do Mythic, like running with randoms, and even guilds that used to only play Heroic are now checking out Mythic bosses. A full flex mode for Mythic isn't planned, but it's definitely possible that from time to time there will be a few bosses that have this feature. Regarding Mythic raid lockouts, you could say that might be adjusted again, for example in the future when the Hall of Fame is full, but you can't really say for sure at the moment. And in the end, they just want to focus on the future now and give players more flexibility with lockouts and raid structure, but all of that will happen in small steps at first. And then lastly, the topic was item level and gatekeeping, meaning keeping people from something. Accordingly, they say, yeah, at this point in the past, you knew, hey, if someone is running around in Sunwell raid gear, they cleared the whole raid and had to do all of it. Nowadays, through raids, dungeons, delves, you can basically do whatever you want, which at this point, yeah, is a bit more difficult. It was also said that some people call this gatekeeping toxic, and he wouldn't say that at this point. And at the same time, he added, because gatekeeping was criticized, high item level gear, mythic gear, is much more available than it ever was before. But they want to scale that back a bit in Season 2, yeah. That means there will actually be even more gatekeeping. That's how it sounded to me at this point. But well, that's what Ian said. What do you think about that? Feel free to write it in the comments. Give me your feedback here. I'm curious. And with that, thanks for watching. See you in the next video, and take care.